I never imagined that my life would change so drastically on a Tuesday morning in March. I was 24 years old, working as a graphic designer in downtown Portland, living in a small apartment that I could barely afford, but I was happy. My independence meant everything to me. I had distanced myself from my family 2 years earlier when I discovered they were involved in activities I couldn't support. But that Tuesday, everything I had built came crashing down with a single phone call. "Emma, you need to come home immediately." My mother's voice was shaking, something I had never heard before. Maria Santos had always been the pillar of strength in our family, the woman who could face any storm with her head held high. But now there was pure terror in her voice. "Mom, I told you I don't want to be involved in Dad's business anymore. Whatever problem you're facing, they're going to kill us, Emma." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Your father, he made a mistake, a big mistake. We owe $2 million to people who don't forgive debts." I felt the world spinning around me. $2 million. The amount was so astronomical that my mind couldn't even process it. I sank into my desk chair, staring at the computer screen where I'd been working on a logo design just minutes before. Now that normal life seemed like a distant memory. "How is that even possible, Mom?" "The shipment from Colombia was intercepted by authorities. Your father had already spent the advance money they gave him. Now they want it back with interest, and they want it in 30 days. Her voice broke completely. "Emma, they showed us photos of what they do to families who can't pay. I can't describe what we saw." I closed my eyes, trying to control the nausea that was rising in my throat. I had suspected that my father, Ricardo Santos, was involved in illegal activities, but I never imagined the scale. I thought it was just money laundering for local businesses, maybe some tax evasion. But drug trafficking, international shipments, this was much worse than I had ever imagined. "Why are you calling me? I have nothing to do with this." "Because they know about you, Emma. They have photos of you leaving your apartment, of you at work, of you having coffee at that place you like on Morrison Street. They know everything about your life." The panic in her voice was growing. "They said if we don't pay, they'll start with you. They said young women are worth more in their business." The implication hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. This couldn't be happening. I had worked so hard to build a life away from all this chaos, and now it was catching up with me in the worst possible way. If you're watching this and have ever felt trapped by your family's mistakes, you know exactly how I felt at that moment. Please hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how this story unfolds, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. "There has to be another way, Mom. We can go to the police. We can—" "No police!" she screamed so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Emma, these people have contacts everywhere. They showed us photos of police officers who tried to investigate them. We can't trust anyone." I stood up and started pacing around my small apartment, looking at my plants, my books, my small collection of vintage posters. Everything that made this place my sanctuary now seemed fragile and temporary. How had my life become a thriller movie overnight? "So what do you want from me?" "Come home tonight. We need to talk as a family and figure out how to solve this." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had a strange quality, almost as if she was reading from a script. "There might be a way out of this, Emma, but it requires sacrifice from all of us." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. I knew my mother well enough to recognize when she was hiding something, but what choice did I have? If these people really knew where I lived and worked, I wasn't safe anywhere. "I'll drive down tonight," I said finally. "No, don't drive. They might be watching the roads. Take the bus, the 8 p.m. Greyhound. Text me when you're getting close to Salem." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment for 2 hours staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency and wouldn't be coming to work for a few days. I packed a small bag, not knowing if I would ever return to this place that had been my refuge. The bus ride to Salem was the longest 3 hours of my life. Every person who got on or off seemed suspicious to me. Every phone call from another passenger sounded like a potential threat. I kept thinking about my mother's words. "They have photos of you." How long had they been watching me? How much did they know about my daily routine? When I finally arrived at my childhood home, I almost didn't recognize it. The house where I'd spent 18 years of my life now looked like a fortress. There were new security cameras everywhere, metal bars on the windows that hadn't been there before, and a man I didn't recognize sitting in a car across the street. My father opened the door before I could even knock. Ricardo Santos looked like he had aged 10 years in the 2 years since I'd last seen him. His hair, which had always been impeccably styled, was disheveled and streaked with grey. His face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Emma, mi hija, thank God you're here," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt desperate. "Dad, what have you gotten us into?" He pulled back and looked at me with eyes full of regret. "Something I should have never touched, but now we're all in this together, and we need to find a way out." The next morning, I woke up in my old bedroom, surrounded by memories of a simpler time. My high school diploma still hung on the wall next to photos of friends I had lost touch with. Looking at those images of my younger self, smiling and carefree, felt like looking at a different person entirely. Downstairs, I found my parents sitting at the kitchen table with a man I had never seen before. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and intense green eyes. He was wearing an expensive suit and had the kind of posture that suggested military training. When I entered the room, he stood up immediately, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Emma. I'm Marcus Thompson. I've heard a lot about you." I shook his hand, noting that his grip was firm and his hands were calloused, not what you'd expect from someone wearing such an expensive suit. There was something about him that didn't quite fit, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "Marcus has a proposal that could solve all our problems," my father said, gesturing for me to sit down. "What kind of proposal?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Marcus sat back down and leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I represent certain business interests that are willing to assume your family's debt in exchange for a strategic alliance." "What kind of strategic alliance?" "Marriage," my mother said quietly. "Emma, Marcus is willing to marry you, and in exchange his people will pay off the debt and ensure our family's protection." I felt like I had been slapped. "Are you insane? You want me to marry a complete stranger?" "It's not as crazy as it sounds," Marcus said, his voice calm and measured. "I need a wife for immigration purposes. My business requires me to establish permanent residency in the United States, and marriage is the fastest path. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more." "Immigration purposes? Where are you from?" "Canada. I've been working in the States on temporary visas, but my business partners prefer more permanent arrangements." He pulled out a tablet and showed me some documents. "I'm willing to pay $2.5 million for this arrangement, which would cover your family's debt plus interest." I stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. $2.5 million for a fake marriage. Not fake, legal and binding, but yes, purely for business purposes. After a year, when my residency is secured, we can divorce amicably. You'll receive an additional $500,000 as compensation for your time. My head was spinning. $3 million total. It was more money than I could ever hope to see in my lifetime. But something about this whole situation felt wrong. Why would a Canadian businessman need to get involved with drug dealers to find a wife? There were legal services for arranged marriages. This felt unnecessarily complicated and dangerous. "I need to think about this," I said. "I understand your hesitation," Marcus replied, "but I need an answer within 48 hours. My business partners are not patient people, and your family's creditors are even less so." After Marcus left, I confronted my parents in the living room. "This is insane. You can't seriously expect me to marry a complete stranger." "Emma, you don't understand the gravity of our situation," my father said. "I've seen what these people do to families who can't pay. It's not just death. It's torture, humiliation, and then death. And they don't just target the person who owes them money. They target everyone that person loves." My mother was crying silently on the couch. "Mija, I know it's not fair. I know it's not what you wanted for your life. But this man seems decent. He's offering you financial security beyond anything we could ever provide. And after a year, you'll be free and wealthy. How do you even know him? How did this arrangement come about?" My parents exchanged a look that made me even more suspicious. "He approached us through mutual contacts," my father said finally. "Apparently, he had been looking for someone with your profile for some time." "My profile? What does that mean?" "College educated, no criminal record, no current romantic entanglements, estranged from family so there would be fewer questions about a sudden marriage." My mother listed these qualities like she was reading from a resume. "Emma, he investigated you before making this offer. He knows you're perfect for what he needs." The idea that this stranger had been investigating my life made my skin crawl. How much did he know about me? Had he been watching me like the drug dealers had? The thought that my privacy had been invaded by multiple parties made me feel violated and vulnerable. "There's something else," my father added reluctantly. "If we don't accept this offer, Marcus said he knows other people who might be interested in assuming the debt, but their terms wouldn't be as civilized. What does that mean? It means you might end up married anyway, but to someone much worse and without any financial compensation. I spent the rest of the day walking around my old neighborhood, trying to clear my head and think of alternatives. Could I go to the FBI? But my parents were right about one thing. If these people had contacts in law enforcement, reporting them could make things worse. Could I run away? Maybe move to another country? But they had already demonstrated that they could find me anywhere. By evening, I realized I was trapped. Every option I could think of either put my family in more danger or put me in a worse situation than the one being offered. Marcus Thompson's proposal was starting to look like the least terrible option available. That night, I called Marcus and told him I would need to meet with him alone before giving my final answer. He agreed immediately and suggested we meet at a coffee shop in downtown Portland the next day. Something about how quickly he agreed made me think he had been expecting this request. "I want to know more about you before I make this decision," I told him. "Of course, I understand completely. I'll answer any questions you have." But even as I hung up the phone, I had the strange feeling that Marcus Thompson had been prepared for this conversation long before I had decided to have it. The coffee shop Marcus chose was small and tucked away in a part of downtown Portland that I didn't know well. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. It was a detail that struck me as oddly professional, like someone who was accustomed to always having an escape route. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as I sat down across from him. "Of course. I imagine you have a lot of questions." I had spent the entire previous night writing down everything I wanted to know about this man, who was asking me to tie my life to his. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is your business? Import-export. I work with various companies to facilitate the movement of goods between Canada, the United States, and several Latin American countries. His answer sounded rehearsed, like something he had said many times before. What kind of goods? Electronics, automotive parts, textiles. Nothing exciting, but it's profitable. He sipped his coffee and watched my face carefully. "I know it sounds vague, but the specifics are commercially sensitive. How did you find out about my family's situation?" "Business networks. When you work in international commerce, you hear about people who need financial solutions. Your father's associates mentioned that he had a daughter who might be suitable for what I needed." Something about his phrasing bothered me. "Suitable for what you needed? That makes it sound like you were shopping for a wife." Marcus smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. "I suppose that's exactly what I was doing. Emma, I'm not going to pretend this is romantic. I need a spouse for legal reasons, and you need money to save your family. It's a business transaction that benefits both parties. What happens after we're married? Where would we live? I have a house in Lake Oswego. It's large enough that we could maintain separate lives while fulfilling the legal requirements of cohabitation. You could continue your design work, pursue your interests. The only requirement would be that we attend a few social functions together to maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. And after a year, clean divorce, no complications. You'll have your settlement money, and I'll have my permanent residency. We go our separate ways." I studied his face as he spoke, looking for any sign that he was lying or hiding something important. There was something almost too perfect about this arrangement. In my experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "I have one more question, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Go ahead. Are you involved in anything illegal?" He paused for just a moment too long before answering. "Emma, in international business, the line between legal and illegal can sometimes be blurry due to different countries having different regulations, but I can promise you that I have never been arrested, never been charged with a crime, and I have no intention of putting you in any legal jeopardy." It wasn't exactly the answer I had hoped for, but it was probably the most honest answer I was going to get. And given my family's current situation, I wasn't exactly in a position to demand moral purity from anyone. "I need one more day to think about it." "Of course. But Emma, I want you to know that if you agree to this, I will take care of you. Whatever else this arrangement is, I will make sure you're safe and comfortable." There was something in his eyes when he said that. That made me think he might actually mean it. But there was also something else, something I couldn't quite identify. It was like he was holding back information that he wanted to share but couldn't. When I got back to my parents' house, I found them in a state of barely controlled panic. My mother was pacing around the living room while my father sat at his desk, frantically making phone calls in Spanish. "What's wrong?" I asked. "They moved up the deadline," my mother said. The people your father owes money to. They want payment in 1 week, not 30 days. 1 week? Why? My father hung up the phone and turned to face me. They found out about the marriage proposal. I don't know how, but they know. They're afraid we're trying to cheat them somehow. How could they possibly know about Marcus? These people have informants everywhere, Emma. They probably have someone watching this house right now. He pointed toward the window. They said if we try to delay payment by getting involved with other parties, they'll consider it an act of bad faith. What does that mean? It means they'll start with you, my mother whispered. Tonight. I felt my blood turn cold. Tonight. They gave us until midnight to make a decision. Either we accept Marcus's proposal and get the money, or they take you as collateral until we can pay. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was already 6 p.m. 6 hours to make a decision that would change the rest of my life. 6 hours to choose between marrying a stranger and being kidnapped by criminals. Have you called Marcus? He's on his way here, my father said. He said he can expedite the process if necessary. We could be married by tomorrow morning if we go to the courthouse first thing. Tomorrow morning? My voice came out as a squeak. Emma, I know this is all happening too fast, my mother said, sitting down next to me and taking my hands. But sometimes life forces us to make decisions we're not ready for. The important thing is that we'll all be safe. When Marcus arrived an hour later, he seemed different somehow. More focused, more intense. He was carrying a briefcase and wearing a serious expression that I hadn't seen before. I understand we're facing a time constraint, he said without preamble. They want an answer by midnight, my father confirmed. Then we don't have time for a lengthy engagement. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. I've brought everything we need for the marriage license application. We can go to the courthouse tomorrow morning, get married, and have the money transferred by tomorrow afternoon. I stared at the papers in front of me, each one representing another step toward a future I had never planned or wanted. But what choice did I have? The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Emma, Marcus said softly, sitting down next to me. I know this isn't how you imagined your wedding day, but I promise you, once we're married and this situation is resolved, I'll do everything I can to make sure you're happy. I looked into his green eyes and saw something there that I hadn't noticed before. It might have been kindness, or it might have been pity, but whatever it was better than the cold calculation I had expected. Okay, I said finally, let's do it. But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple marriage of convenience. The morning of my wedding day, I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I had set an alarm, but because I hadn't really slept. I had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was making the right decision. In just a few hours, I would be Mrs. Marcus Thompson, and my family's nightmare would supposedly be over. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, my skin was pale from stress, and my hands were shaking slightly from too much caffeine and too little food. This was not how I had ever imagined my wedding day would begin. Downstairs, my mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She looked up when I entered, and I could see that she hadn't slept either. How are you feeling, Mika? Terrified, I answered honestly. Mum, are we absolutely sure there's no other way? She reached across the table and took my hand. Emma, your father spent all night making phone calls, trying to find alternatives. There are none. These people don't negotiate, they don't give extensions, and they don't forgive debts. What about going to the authorities? Surely there's some kind of protection program. Your father tried that 2 years ago, when he first realized how deep he was getting. The FBI agent he contacted ended up dead in a car accident 3 days later. She squeezed my hand tighter. These people have reach that extends far beyond what we can fight. At 8 a.m., Marcus arrived at our house dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit. He was carrying a small bouquet of white roses and had an expression that was both somber and determined. When he saw me, he offered a small smile that seemed genuinely sympathetic. "So you look beautiful, Emma," he said, and somehow I could tell he meant it even though I was wearing a simple white dress that my mother had bought at the last minute from a department store. "Thank you. Are you ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be for a wedding with a 12-hour engagement period." He handed me the bouquet. "I know this isn't the wedding you dreamed of, but I promise I'll try to make it as dignified as possible." We drove to the courthouse in Marcus's black BMW, a car that I noticed had tinted windows and what looked like reinforced panels on the sides. When I asked about it, He said he preferred privacy and security in his line of work. Another small detail that didn't quite fit with his story about being an import-export businessman. At the courthouse, everything moved with an efficiency that suggested Marcus had done this before, or at least had experience navigating bureaucratic processes quickly. He had all the necessary documents, knew exactly which office to go to, and seemed to have anticipated every possible delay or complication. "Have you been married before?" I asked as we waited in line for our marriage license. "No, never, but I've helped other people through this process for business reasons." He paused. "Emma, there's something I want you to know before we do this." My heart started beating faster. "What?" "Whatever happens after today, whatever you learn about me or about this situation, I want you to know that my offer to protect you is genuine. No matter what else this marriage represents, you will be safe." There was something about the way he said it that made me think he was trying to prepare me for something. But before I could ask what he meant, our number was called, and we were ushered into a small office where a tired-looking clerk processed our paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone filing tax returns. The actual ceremony was performed by a judge who clearly did dozens of these quick weddings every day. The whole thing lasted less than 10 minutes. When he asked if I took Marcus to be my husband, I hesitated for just a moment before saying, "I do." When Marcus said the same words, he looked directly into my eyes with an intensity that made me think he was trying to communicate something beyond the simple words. When the judge pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus kissed me gently on the cheek rather than the lips. It was a small gesture, but it felt respectful and appropriate given the circumstances. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," the judge said, handing us our marriage certificate. Mrs. Thompson. I was no longer Emma Santos. I had a new name, a new legal identity, and a new life that I still didn't fully understand. As we left the courthouse, Marcus checked his phone and frowned. "The money transfer will be completed within the hour," he told me. "Your family's debt will be resolved by this afternoon." "That fast?" "When you have the right connections, these things can move very quickly." He opened the car door for me. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." "What? Are you absolutely certain that your father has told you everything about his business dealings, everything about who he owes money to and why?" The question caught me off guard. "I think so." "Why?" "Because in my experience, when people get in this deep with international drug traffickers, there's usually more to the story than what they tell their families." How did he know they were drug traffickers? I had never specifically mentioned that detail to him. My parents had been vague about exactly who my father owed money to, referring to them only as dangerous people or business associates. But Marcus seemed to know more about the situation than he was letting on. "Marcus, how do you know so much about my family's situation?" He was quiet for a long moment as he started the car. "Emma, there are things about this situation that I can't explain to you right now, but I promise you, everything I've told you about wanting to protect you is true. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where nothing made sense and everyone around you seemed to know more than they were saying, you'll understand how I felt in that moment. Something big was happening, something that involved my new husband, my family, and me, but I was the only one who didn't know what it was. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please give it a like, and let me know in the comments if you've ever felt completely in the dark about your own life." As we drove toward what Marcus said would be a small reception lunch with my parents, I couldn't shake the feeling that my wedding day was just the beginning of something much larger and more complicated than a simple business arrangement. The reception Marcus had arranged was lunch at an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland that seemed oddly empty for a Saturday afternoon. As we walked in, I noticed that there were only 3 other tables occupied, and the staff seemed unusually attentive to our presence. The hostess greeted Marcus by name and led us to a private dining room in the back of the restaurant. "You come here often?" I asked as we sat down. "I have business meetings here sometimes. They're very discreet and professional." He pulled out his phone and checked something before putting it face down on the table. "Your parents should be here in about 20 minutes. How do you know when they'll arrive?" "I sent a car for them. Given the circumstances, I thought it would be safer than having them drive themselves." Another small detail that suggested Marcus was more involved in this situation than he had admitted. Why would it be unsafe for my parents to drive to a restaurant? And why did he have access to a car service that could pick them up on such short notice? While we waited, Marcus ordered a bottle of champagne and proposed a toast to new beginnings and mutual protection. The phrase struck me as odd. Most wedding toasts focused on love and happiness, not protection. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you have any family? Anyone who knows about this marriage? He paused, twirling his champagne glass between his fingers. I have some family in Canada, but we're not close. And yes, there are people who know about this marriage, but they understand the nature of the arrangement. What kind of people? Business associates, people who have a vested interest in my ability to work freely in the United States. Before I could ask for more details, my parents arrived, escorted by a man in a black suit who looked more like a bodyguard than a driver. My father looked slightly more relaxed than he had in days, but my mother still seemed nervous and kept looking around the restaurant as if she expected trouble. Emma, Mija, how was the ceremony? My mother asked, kissing me on both cheeks. Quick and efficient, I replied. How are you feeling, Dad? Much better now that this is all resolved, he said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested it wasn't entirely resolved. Marcus, I can't thank you enough for what you've done for our family. It's mutually beneficial, Marcus replied, but I do need to discuss some logistics with you both. He pulled out a tablet and showed my parents some documents that I couldn't see clearly from where I was sitting. Whatever they were looking at made my father's face go pale and my mother grip her napkin tightly. Is this really necessary? My father asked quietly. I'm afraid so. It's the only way to ensure everyone's safety. Marcus looked at me and then back at my parents. Emma doesn't need to know about this part yet. Know about what part? I interjected. Just some security measures, my mother said quickly. Nothing for you to worry about. But I was definitely worrying. Every conversation seemed to involve information that was being kept from me, and I was getting tired of being treated like a child who couldn't handle the truth about her own situation. I'm going to the ladies' room, I announced, standing up. As I walked toward the restroom, I passed by the bar area and noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There were two men sitting at the bar who looked completely out of place in this upscale restaurant. They were wearing casual clothes, had obvious bulges under their jackets that suggested weapons, and they were watching our dining room with the kind of professional attention that made my skin crawl. I ducked into the restroom and immediately called my best friend Sarah, the one person in my life who had nothing to do with this mess. Emma, oh my God, how are you? Your mum called me and said you got married today. What the hell is going on? Sarah, I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to do something for me. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or if you hear that I've been in some kind of accident, I need you to call the FBI and tell them that Emma Santos Thompson was involved in something related to international drug trafficking and a forced marriage. Emma, you're scaring me. What's going on? I can't talk long. Just promise me you'll remember what I said. I promise, but Emma, I hung up and immediately deleted the call from my phone's history. If I was being paranoid, then at least I would feel better knowing someone outside this situation knew something was wrong. If I wasn't being paranoid, then I had just created a lifeline that might save my life. When I returned to the table, the conversation stopped abruptly, and all three of them looked at me with expressions that suggested they had been talking about me. Everything okay? Marcus asked. Fine. Just needed a moment to process everything that's happened today. Of course, it's been a big day for all of us. He signaled the waiter for the check. I think we should head home soon. Emma needs time to get settled into her new living situation. As we prepared to leave, I noticed that the two men from the bar had disappeared, but they were replaced by a different man who was now sitting near the restaurant entrance, reading a newspaper, but clearly watching everyone who entered or left. In the car, driving toward Lake Oswego, I finally decided to confront Marcus about what I had observed. Marcus, who were those men in the restaurant? What men? The ones at the bar who were obviously armed and watching our table. And the one by the entrance when we left. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Emma, I told you that my business sometimes requires security measures. Those men work for a company that provides protection services. Protection from what? From people who might want to interfere with my business relationships. You mean like my family's creditors? Among others. I stared out the window at the expensive neighborhoods we were driving through, trying to process this information. My new husband had armed guards watching us, knew more about my family's criminal connections than he should, and had arranged our marriage with an efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first time navigating complex, illegal situations. Marcus, what exactly do you do for a living? I told you, import-export. That's not an answer. That's a job description so vague it could mean anything. He pulled into the driveway of a large modern house that looked like something from an architecture magazine. It was beautiful, but it was also clearly designed with security in mind. High walls, sophisticated gate system, cameras everywhere, and landscaping that eliminated blind spots. Emma, I know you have questions and I promise I will answer them. But first, let's get you settled in your new home, and then we can talk about everything you want to know. But as I looked at this fortress-like house that was now supposedly my home, I had the distinct feeling that getting answers was going to be much more complicated than Marcus was making it sound. That night, I lay in the guest bedroom of Marcus's house, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He had been respectful about our sleeping arrangements, making it clear that we would maintain separate bedrooms and that the marriage was strictly business. But despite his courtesy, I felt like a prisoner in a very comfortable jail. The house was enormous: 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a home office, a gym, and what Marcus called a security room that he asked me not to enter. Every room had windows, but I noticed they were all equipped with what looked like bulletproof glass and sophisticated alarm systems. Around midnight, I heard voices coming from downstairs. Marcus was on the phone with someone, speaking in a low voice that I couldn't quite make out. I crept to the top of the stairs and tried to listen, but I could only catch fragments of the conversation. The transfer is complete. Santos' family is secure. Need to maintain the cover for at least another week. Yes, she's cooperating. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet. She doesn't suspect anything yet. He was talking about me. I hurried back to my room and closed the door quietly, my heart pounding. Marcus was definitely hiding something significant, and it involved keeping me in the dark about the true nature of our arrangement. The next morning, Marcus seemed different, more relaxed, more open, almost like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He made breakfast and asked me about my plans for the day with a casualness that felt forced. I thought I might go back to my apartment and get more of my things, I said. Actually, I'd prefer if you stayed here for the next few days, just until things settled down with your family's situation. Am I a prisoner here, Marcus? Of course not. But Emma, there are people who might want to hurt you to get to your family, and now to get to me. It's just safer if you stay close to home for a while. How long is a while? A week, maybe 2. I'm expecting some business developments that should resolve most of the security concerns. Business developments. Everything with Marcus came back to mysterious business that he couldn't or wouldn't explain clearly. That afternoon, while Marcus was in his office on a series of phone calls, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. Most of the rooms were exactly what they appeared to be: expensive, well-decorated, and impersonal. But when I got to his home office, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see that Marcus was not just on a phone call. He was on a video conference with multiple people, and they were not the kind of people I would expect to see in an import-export business meeting. One of the people on the screen was wearing what looked like a federal agent's badge. Another appeared to be in some kind of official government office. And a third person was someone I recognized from news reports as a high-ranking DEA official. I only caught a few words of the conversation, but what I heard made my blood run cold. The Santos operation is bigger than we initially thought. Multiple international connections. We need to maintain the marriage cover for at least another month. The daughter is key to accessing the family's full network. The daughter. They were talking about me. And Marcus wasn't just some businessman who had offered to help my family. He was working with federal agents, and I was somehow a key part of an investigation into my own family. I backed away from the door as quietly as possible and went to my room, where I sat on the bed trying to process what I had just learned. My marriage wasn't a business arrangement. It was part of a federal investigation. Marcus was probably an undercover agent, and I had been manipulated into marrying him so that law enforcement could get closer to my family's criminal operations. But if that was true, then what did it mean for my family? Were they about to be arrested? And what did it mean for me? Was I a target of the investigation, or was I just being used as an unwitting informant? That evening, Marcus suggested we go out for dinner to celebrate our first week of marriage. He chose another upscale restaurant, and once again I noticed the same pattern of armed security personnel keeping watch from discreet locations. As we sat across from each other, sharing a bottle of wine and making small talk about inconsequential topics, I decided I couldn't pretend anymore. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. Are you a federal agent? He almost dropped his wine glass. For just a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked, and I saw surprise, calculation, and something that might have been relief. Why would you ask that? Because I saw your video conference today. I heard you talking about the Santos operation, and about maintaining our marriage as a cover. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was completely different. The polite businessman was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he had been carrying a heavy burden for a very long time. Emma, if I tell you the truth, there's no going back. Once you know, you become part of this operation whether you want to or not. I think I'm already part of it whether I want to or not. He nodded slowly. You're right. You've been part of it from the beginning. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst. This was it. The moment when I would finally learn what was really happening to my life. I'm Special Agent Marcus Thompson, DEA. I've been investigating your father's organization for the past 18 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I thought I knew about the past week was a lie. My marriage, my husband, even my family's financial crisis, it was all part of a federal investigation. My father's organization? You mean it's bigger than just the debt to the drug dealers? Emma, your father isn't a victim of drug dealers. He's one of the biggest drug dealers on the West Coast. The debt he told you about, it doesn't exist. It was a story we created to give you a reason to agree to marry me. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. That's impossible. My father might be involved in some shady business, but he's not a major drug dealer. Your father's organization moves approximately $50 million worth of cocaine and heroin through Portland every year. He has connections with cartels in Colombia, Mexico, and Bolivia. The house you grew up in, your college education, the comfortable life your family has always lived, it was all funded by drug money. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my life, about myself, it was all based on lies. But if you think this revelation was shocking, wait until you hear what Marcus told me next, because that's when I learned the real reason they needed me to marry him, and it had nothing to do with immigration or business arrangements. Hit that like button if you're as stunned as I was, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own identity. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, that's impossible. I would have known. I lived in that house for 18 years. I would have seen something. Marcus reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Emma, your parents went to extraordinary lengths to keep you away from the business. They genuinely love you and wanted you to have a normal life. But the money that paid for your art classes, your car, your college tuition, it all came from drug trafficking. I pulled my hand away from his and stood up, needing space to think. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too crowded, even though it was nearly empty. Why should I believe you? How do I know this isn't just another lie? Because I can prove it. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photographs. These were taken over the past year. The photos showed my father meeting with men I didn't recognize in locations I had never seen. But what made my stomach turn was that in several of the photos he was clearly handling packages that looked like the drug shipments I had seen in movies and TV shows. This could be fake. Photos can be manipulated. You're right, they can. But what about this? He showed me a video on his phone. It was security camera footage of my father's warehouse, the one he had always told me was used for his import business. But instead of legitimate goods, I watched my father supervising the unloading of packages that were clearly being handled with the kind of care reserved for very valuable and very illegal cargo. I sat back down heavily, feeling like my entire world was collapsing. How long have you known about this? The DEA has been investigating your father for 3 years, but we could never get close enough to gather the evidence we needed for prosecution. Your family's security was too good, and they were very careful about who they trusted. So you decided to marry into the family. The marriage wasn't my idea originally. We had been looking for a way to get inside the organization when your father's associate contacted us about his debt problem. We realized it was an opportunity to place an agent inside the family structure. You mean someone in my father's organization is working with the DEA? Marcus nodded. We have an informant who has been providing us with intelligence. When he told us about your father's plan to arrange a marriage for you, we saw it as a perfect cover for getting me into position. I felt sick. Who is the informant? I can't tell you that. But Emma, you need to understand something very important. Your father's organization is much larger than just drug trafficking. They're also involved in money laundering, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling. The people he works with are extremely dangerous, and they have killed people who have gotten in their way. Are you saying my father is a murderer? I'm saying your father is part of an organization that has committed murder, yes. Whether he has personally killed anyone, I don't know. But he has definitely ordered violence against people who have threatened his business. I thought about my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bicycle, who had cried at my high school graduation, who had always been gentle and loving with me. How was it possible that the same person was capable of ordering violence against other people? What happens now? I asked quietly. That depends on you. What do you mean? Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. Emma, we need your help to finish this investigation. Your father trusts you, and now that you're married to me, you have access to parts of his life that we've never been able to reach. You want me to spy on my own father. I want you to help us stop a criminal organization that has destroyed thousands of lives through drug distribution and violence. And if I refuse? Then I arrest your father based on the evidence we already have, which is substantial but not comprehensive. He'll go to prison for the rest of his life, but the larger organization will continue operating under someone else's leadership. And if I help you? Then we can potentially take down the entire network, which means not only will your father face justice, but we can prevent the organization from hurting more people. I stared at him, trying to process the impossible choice he was presenting. Help destroy my father and potentially save lives, or refuse and watch him go to prison anyway, while the criminal organization continued to operate? How do I know you're telling me the truth about any of this? How do I know this isn't all an elaborate setup? Because, Emma, if we wanted to arrest your father, we could do it tomorrow. We have enough evidence already. The only reason we haven't is because we want to get the bigger fish. The people your father reports to, the international connections, the financial networks that make this operation possible. What exactly would you need me to do? We need access to your father's home office, his personal computer, and his private meetings. We need to know who he talks to, where he goes, and what his plans are for the future of the operation. You want me to betray my family. I want you to help us save your family. Emma, if your father continues on this path, he's going to end up dead or in prison anyway. At least this way, he might have a chance to cooperate and receive a lighter sentence. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. This is insane. A week ago I was a graphic designer living a quiet life in Portland. Now you're asking me to become an undercover informant against my own father. I know it's a lot to ask. But Emma, you have the power to save lives. The drugs your father's organization distributes end up in the hands of teenagers, young adults, people who overdose and die. You could help prevent that. And what happens to me after all this is over? Do I go into witness protection? Do I get a new identity? We would make sure you're safe and financially secure. You could continue your design career anywhere you want. The DEA takes care of people who help us with important cases. I looked around the restaurant, at the other diners who were enjoying normal Saturday evening meals, celebrating anniversaries and birthdays and other ordinary life events. I envied them their uncomplicated lives, their simple problems, their ability to make decisions based on what they wanted, rather than what they were forced to choose between impossible alternatives. I need time to think about this. I understand. But Emma, I need an answer within 48 hours. We're planning to move forward with arrests at the end of this week, with or without your cooperation. And if I agree to help you, what happens to my mother? She doesn't know about any of this illegal activity. She's innocent. If she's truly innocent, she won't face any charges. We're only interested in the people who are actively participating in criminal activities. As we drove home in silence, I realized that my wedding day had not been the end of my family's crisis. It had been the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous situation than I had ever imagined. And now I had to decide whether to save my father by betraying him or watch him go to prison, while knowing I could have done something to help bring down the criminal organization that had apparently shaped my entire life. The choice that lay ahead of me would determine not only my father's fate, but my own identity, my relationship with my family, and quite possibly whether I would live to see my next birthday. I spent the next 48 hours in what felt like a waking nightmare. Every time I looked at Marcus, I saw both the man who had promised to protect me and the federal agent who had manipulated me into marriage for his investigation. Every time I thought about my father, I saw both the loving parent who had raised me and the criminal who had built his life on other people's suffering. On Tuesday morning, Marcus found me sitting in the kitchen at 6 a.m., still in my pajamas, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. "Have you made a decision?" he asked gently. "I have questions first." "Okay. If I help you, what exactly happens to my father? What kind of sentence are we talking about?" Marcus sat down across from me. "If he cooperates fully with the investigation and helps us take down the larger organization, he could potentially receive a reduced sentence, maybe 10 to 15 years instead of life without parole. And if I don't help you?" Based on the evidence we already have, he'll likely receive life without parole. The federal sentencing guidelines for drug trafficking at this scale are very harsh. What about my mother? If she's truly innocent of knowledge about the criminal activities, she won't be charged. But Emma, she'll lose everything. The house, the cars, all their assets will be seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise. I thought about my mother, who had spent her entire adult life believing she was married to a legitimate businessman. Learning the truth would destroy her, but losing everything she thought she owned would destroy her even more. There's something else you need to know, Marcus continued. The DEA is planning to execute search and arrest warrants this Friday morning. Whether you help us or not, your father will be arrested in 3 days. 3 days? My voice came out as a whisper. Emma, I've been authorized to offer you a deal. If you agree to cooperate, we can arrange for you to have a private conversation with your father before the arrest. You can give him a chance to prepare, to decide whether he wants to cooperate or fight the charges. You would let me warn him? We would let you give him the opportunity to make an informed decision about his future. It might be the last gift you can give him as his daughter. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine that conversation. How do you tell your father that you know he's a criminal? How do you tell him that you've been working with the people who are about to arrest him? How do you say goodbye to someone who might spend the rest of his life in prison? If I do this, if I help you, I want guarantees about my mother's protection. I want her to have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. I can't promise specific financial arrangements, but I can promise that we'll work with her to ensure she has access to legitimate assets and support services. And what about me? What happens to me after all this is over? That depends on what you want. You could stay in Portland, start over somewhere else, or enter witness protection if you feel unsafe. But Emma, once this operation is complete, you'll be free to live your life however you choose. I thought about the life I had built before all this started. My small apartment, my design work, my quiet independence. Could I ever go back to that kind of normalcy after everything I now knew about my family and myself? Okay, I said finally. I'll help you, but I want to be the one to tell my father what's happening. Agreed. That afternoon, Marcus briefed me on what the DEA needed from me. They wanted access to my father's home office, copies of his personal files, and recordings of any conversations he might have about future criminal activities. They also wanted me to encourage him to meet with his top associates so they could identify and arrest the entire leadership structure. Remember, Emma, your father is a smart man. If you act differently around him, if you seem nervous or ask unusual questions, he might become suspicious. You need to act exactly like the daughter he's always known. How am I supposed to act normal when I know what I know? Focus on the fact that you're trying to save his life. Everything you're doing is giving him the best possible chance for a future. That evening, I called my parents and asked if I could come for dinner the next night. I told them I wanted to share some news about my new marriage and life with Marcus. My mother was delighted, saying she had been worried about how I was adjusting to such a sudden life change. When I arrived at my parents' house Wednesday evening, everything looked exactly the same as it had a week earlier. The same furniture, the same family photos on the walls, the same comfortable atmosphere that I had always associated with home. But now I saw it all differently, knowing that everything around me had been purchased with drug money. My mother had made my favorite meal, enchiladas with homemade mole sauce, and my father seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years. Whatever relief he felt from having his debt resolved had clearly lifted an enormous weight from his shoulders. So, Mija, how is married life treating you? My father asked as we sat down to eat. It's been an adjustment. Marcus is a good man, but there's so much I don't know about him. I was surprised at how easily the truth came out disguised as casual conversation. What kind of things? His business, mostly. He travels a lot, takes a lot of phone calls at odd hours. Sometimes I feel like I married a stranger. My parents exchanged a look that I now recognized as the kind of glance shared by people who understand the challenges of maintaining secrets in a marriage. That's normal in the beginning, my mother said. Your father and I didn't share everything about our lives right away either. Trust builds over time. But how do you know when someone is hiding something important from you? You don't always know, my father said quietly. Sometimes people keep secrets to protect the people they love. Sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lies. I realized he was talking about himself as much as he was talking about Marcus. In his mind, he had been protecting me from the truth about his criminal activities. He probably genuinely believed that keeping me ignorant had been an act of love. After dinner, while my mother was cleaning up in the kitchen, my father asked me to come to his office. It was the first time he had ever invited me into that room, and I realized this might be my only opportunity to gather the intelligence Marcus needed. "Emma, there's something I want to discuss with you privately." My heart started racing. Did he suspect something? Had I been acting strangely without realizing it? "What is it, Dad?" "I want you to know that the problems our family was facing, the financial difficulties, they're completely resolved now. You don't need to worry about our safety anymore." "That's a relief. But I also want you to understand that your marriage to Marcus has connected our family to some very powerful people. People who expect loyalty and discretion." "What do you mean?" "I mean that there may be times when Marcus asks you to do things that seem strange or uncomfortable, times when he needs you to travel with him, or meet with his associates, or simply not ask questions about his activities. My father was essentially giving me permission to spy on him while thinking he was preparing me to be complicit in my husband's criminal activities. The irony was almost too much to bear." "Dad, is there something you're not telling me about Marcus?" He paused for a long moment, studying my face. "Emma, there are things about this situation that are complicated, but I want you to know that everything your mother and I have done, we've done to protect you and give you the best life possible, even if it meant forcing me to marry someone I barely knew. Especially then." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is for you. Money that belongs to you, not to the family business, not to Marcus, just to you. If anything ever happens to me or to your mother, I want you to have resources that no one can take away from you." I took the envelope, which felt like it contained several $1,000s in cash. "Dad, you're scaring me. Why are you talking like something might happen to you?" "Because in my line of work, you always have to be prepared for unexpected changes." He came around the desk and hugged me. "But Emma, no matter what happens, I want you to know that being your father has been the greatest joy of my life." I hugged him back, feeling the weight of everything I knew and everything I was about to do. This might be the last time I ever embraced my father as his daughter, rather than as a federal informant. "Dad, I love you too, and I want you to know that whatever challenges we face as a family, we'll face them together." It was the truth, even though he didn't understand what I meant by it. Thursday morning, I met with Marcus and his DEA team at a safe house in downtown Portland. The contrast between this sterile professional environment and the warm family dinner I had shared the night before was jarring. Here my father was referred to as the target, and my family was called the criminal organization. "What did you learn?" Marcus asked as I handed over the photos I had taken of documents in my father's office. "He knows something is wrong. He gave me an envelope of cash and talked about being prepared for unexpected changes. I think he suspects the investigation is closing in on him." Agent Sarah Chen, Marcus's supervisor, studied the photos on her tablet. "This is excellent intelligence. These shipping manifests confirm our suspicions about the Colombian connection, and these financial records will help us trace the money laundering operation." "There's something else," I said. "My father made comments about Marcus that suggest he thinks Marcus is also involved in criminal activities. He warned me that I might be asked to do things that seem strange or uncomfortable." Marcus frowned. "That's not good. If your father suspects I'm not who I claim to be, it could compromise the entire operation. Or it could mean that your cover story was too perfect," Agent Chen suggested. "Sometimes criminals are suspicious of people who seem too eager to help them." "We need to move up the timeline," Marcus said. "If Ricardo Santos is starting to ask questions about my identity, we can't wait until Friday to execute the arrests." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we're moving tomorrow morning instead of Friday. And Emma, it means you need to have that conversation with your father tonight." Agent Chen handed me a small recording device. "This conversation will be crucial for establishing your father's state of mind and his willingness to cooperate. The more he admits to you about his criminal activities, the stronger our case becomes." I stared at the tiny device in my palm. "You want me to record my father confessing to crimes? We want to give him every possible opportunity to help himself by being honest about his situation," Marcus said gently. "Emma, this could be the difference between a life sentence and a chance at eventual freedom." That evening I drove to my parents' house with the recording device hidden in my purse. I had no idea how I was going to initiate a conversation about my father's criminal activities, but I knew this might be my last chance to hear the truth from him directly. I found him in his office, working on his computer. When I knocked on the doorframe, he looked up with a smile that reminded me of all the times he had helped me with homework at that same desk. "Emma, what a nice surprise. What brings you by tonight?" "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." His expression immediately became more serious. "Of course. What is it? Is Marcus really who he says he is?" The question hung in the air between us for a long moment. I could see him calculating how much to tell me, weighing the risks of honesty against the dangers of continued deception. "What makes you ask that?" "Because nothing about this situation makes sense. A Canadian businessman doesn't just appear out of nowhere with millions of dollars to solve problems for people he's never met. And the way he handles security, the way he talks about his work, it all feels like something else." My father closed his laptop and gestured for me to sit down across from his desk. "Emma, what I'm about to tell you will change how you see your family forever. Are you sure you want to know the truth?" I activated the recording device in my purse. "Yes, Dad. I need to know the truth. Your husband is not a businessman. He's a federal agent, probably DEA, and your marriage is part of an investigation into my activities." I tried to look shocked, even though I already knew exactly what he was telling me. "What activities?" "Emma, for the past 15 years I've been involved in importing and distributing illegal drugs. Cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, substances that have destroyed thousands of lives and families. I've made millions of dollars, and I've used that money to give you and your mother a comfortable life." "Dad, that's impossible. I would have known." "You wouldn't have known because I worked very hard to keep you away from that part of my life. But Emma, the house you grew up in, your college education, your car, everything you've ever owned, it was all purchased with drug money." I felt genuine tears starting to form in my eyes. Hearing him admit it out loud in his own words made it real in a way that Marcus's evidence hadn't. "How long have you known about Marcus?" "I've suspected for about a week. There were too many things that didn't add up, and I have contacts who warned me that federal agents had been asking questions about our family." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was hoping I was wrong, and because if I was right, I wanted you to have plausible deniability. If you genuinely didn't know that Marcus was an agent, you couldn't be charged as a co-conspirator. I realized that even in this moment, even while confessing to major crimes, my father was still trying to protect me." "Dad, what's going to happen now?" "Tomorrow morning, probably very early, federal agents will come to arrest me. They'll search this house, seize all our assets, and charge me with drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy." He paused. "I'll probably spend the rest of my life in prison. Is there anything you can do, any way to fight the charges? I could cooperate with their investigation, help them arrest the people I work with, provide information about the larger organization. If I do that, I might receive a reduced sentence." "Would you do that?" "I don't know. The people I work with don't forgive betrayal, Emma. If I cooperate with the federal government, I'll spend whatever time I have left in prison looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to kill me. But if you don't cooperate, then I'll definitely spend the rest of my life in prison, but at least I won't be living in fear of assassination." I looked at my father, this man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with my math homework, and realized that he was calmly discussing the possibility of being murdered in prison as if it were a business decision. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words I spoke would change our relationship forever. "I know about Marcus. I've known for several days. And I've been working with the DEA to gather information about your activities." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. My father stared at me with an expression that cycled through surprise, disappointment, understanding, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness. "I see," he said quietly. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. They told me it was the only way to help you, the only way to give you a chance at a reduced sentence. Emma, you don't need to apologize. You made the best decision you could with the information you had." He smiled sadly. "And you know what? I'm proud of you." "Proud of me? You chose to try to save your father, even though it meant betraying him. That takes a kind of courage that most people don't have. If you've ever had to choose between saving someone and betraying them, you know how impossible that choice feels. But what happened next showed me that sometimes the people we love make that choice easier by choosing love over blame. Please share this story if it's touched you, because what my father said next changed how I understood both family and forgiveness forever. Dad, will you cooperate with the investigation? Yes, Emma, I'll cooperate. Not because I'm afraid of prison, but because I want to give you the best chance of having a normal life after all this is over. Friday morning came too soon and not soon enough. I was awake at 5 a.m., sitting in Marcus's kitchen drinking coffee and waiting for the phone call that would tell me my father had been arrested. Marcus was already dressed in his federal agent gear, bulletproof vest, badge, weapon, looking like a completely different person than the businessman who had proposed to me just 2 weeks earlier. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "I don't think I'll be okay for a long time," I answered honestly, "but I know I made the right choice." At 6:47 a.m., Marcus's phone rang. "Thompson, understood. Yes, both suspects are in custody. No resistance. Excellent." He hung up and looked at me with an expression that was both professional satisfaction and personal sympathy. "Your father and 3 of his associates were arrested without incident. Your mother was not charged, and she's been provided with victim services support. What happens to her now? The house and most of their assets will be seized, but she'll be allowed to keep enough money to rent an apartment and live modestly. The federal government doesn't want to leave innocent family members destitute. Can I see her?" "Of course, in fact, she's asking for you." I found my mother at my childhood home, sitting in the living room surrounded by federal agents who were carefully cataloging everything in the house. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way I had never seen before. When she saw me, she stood up and hugged me with the desperation of someone who had just learned that her entire life had been a lie. "Emma, mija, I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea about any of it. I know, Mom, I believe you. They told me you helped them. They said you worked with the federal agents to gather evidence against your father." I pulled back to look at her face, expecting to see anger or disappointment. Instead, I saw gratitude. "You saved his life, didn't you? If you hadn't helped them, he would have gotten a much worse sentence." "I hope so. He's agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which should help. He's a good man, Emma. He made terrible choices, but he's a good man who loves his family." Over the next 6 months, I learned more about my father's criminal organization than I had ever wanted to know. The DEA investigation, supported by his cooperation, led to the arrest of 43 people involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and related crimes. The organization had been moving over $200 million worth of illegal drugs through the Pacific Northwest every year. My father received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, which his lawyer said was remarkably lenient given the scope of his crimes. He would be eligible for parole in 8 years if he continued to cooperate with ongoing investigations. My mother moved to a small apartment in Portland and got a job working for a non-profit organization that helped families affected by drug addiction. She told me that helping other people deal with the consequences of drug trafficking gave her a sense of purpose and a way to atone for the comfortable life she had unknowingly lived on drug money. As for Marcus and me, our marriage was annulled after the conclusion of the investigation. The DEA offered me a new identity and relocation assistance, but I decided to stay in Portland and rebuild my life in the place where it had first fallen apart. Marcus and I remained friends, bound together by the strange circumstances that had brought us together and the shared experience of navigating an impossible situation. He told me that our case had been one of the most successful infiltration operations in DEA history, and that my cooperation had been crucial to its success. "Do you regret it?" he asked me one day as we had coffee together, 6 months after my father's arrest. "Which part? Marrying you under false pretenses, learning that my father was a drug dealer, helping to send him to prison? Any of it. All of it." I thought about his question for a long time. I regret that the situation existed in the first place. I regret that my father made the choices he made, and I regret that so many people were hurt by his actions. But I don't regret helping to stop him, and I don't regret helping to take down an organization that was poisoning communities and destroying families. What about your father? Do you regret helping to send him to prison? No, because prison is giving him something he never had when he was free, the opportunity to take responsibility for his actions and try to make amends. He's teaching literacy classes to other inmates now, and he's working with federal investigators to help them understand how international drug trafficking operations work. In a strange way, I think he's more at peace now than he was when he was living a lie. I visit my father every month at the Federal Correctional Institution, where he's serving his sentence. Our conversations are different now, more honest, more real, more focused on who we actually are rather than who we pretended to be. He tells me that he's proud of the choice I made, and I tell him that I'm proud of the choice he made to cooperate with the investigation. My mother has started dating a man she met at the non-profit where she works. He's a former police officer who understands the complexities of loving someone who has made serious mistakes. She seems happier now, living a smaller but more authentic life than she did when she was unknowingly married to a drug dealer. As for me, I've started my own graphic design business, specializing in marketing materials for nonprofits and social justice organizations. It feels good to use my skills to help people who are working to make the world better, rather than unknowingly benefiting from activities that made the world worse. I've also started speaking at high schools and colleges about my experience, helping young people understand how drug trafficking affects not just the people who use drugs, but the families and communities of everyone involved in the trade. It's my way of trying to prevent other families from going through what mine went through. People often ask me if I'm angry about being deceived by both my husband and my father, about having my life turned upside down by secrets and lies and federal investigations. The truth is, I'm not angry. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I learned the truth before it was too late to do something about it. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to help stop a criminal organization that was hurting people. I'm grateful that my father chose cooperation over continued crime, and I'm grateful that my mother and I were able to build a new relationship based on honesty rather than comfortable ignorance. Most of all, I'm grateful that I discovered I was stronger than I thought I was. When I was forced to choose between my family's comfort and other people's safety, I chose other people's safety. When I was forced to choose between loyalty and justice, I chose justice. When I was forced to choose between the life I had planned and the life that was right, I chose the life that was right. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't painless, but it was worth it. Because now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I can respect, someone who made hard choices for the right reasons, someone who helped save lives, including the lives of her own family members. And that person, the person I became through this experience, is someone I'm proud to be. If this story has taught you anything about the power of making difficult moral choices, or if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for the people we care about is refuse to enable their harmful choices, even when that refusal comes with a terrible personal cost. The truth, I learned, really can set you free. But first it might force you to do things that feel like betrayal, and sometimes that's exactly what love looks like.